England, 1976.
They are punk rockers.
Disillusioned youth.
Raw, outrageous and crude.
Anarchy. Striking miners.
The new craze, they tell me.
Mountains of rubbish. The winter of discontent.
Worthless, nasty.
Societal decline. No future. Chaos.
They're a hero.
Welcome to Destroy, a podcast about how the punk movement of 1976 spawned a cultural revolution still being felt today.
You have to destroy in order to create.
I don't do big setups. I see other photographers in America especially. They work with a lot of lights, they're assistants, and it's a very different thing. It's an idea of a rock star or something. And I think in my photographs, there really are these people. You know.
In the early 70s, as punk was still forming in Malcolm McLaren's mind, Dutch avant-garde musician Herman Brood was making waves with his band, The Wild Romance. Known for his hedonistic lifestyle, Brood embodied the rebellious spirit of rock and roll. And at the same time, a young man who had turned away from his religious upbringing picked up his father's camera and captured it all. Eventually finding himself in London inspired by Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures, a single photo would canonize the band and establish him as one of the world's most influential photographers. His iconic images of David Bowie, Elvis Costello, Billy Idol, Nick Cave, The Slits and Susie and the Banshees often featured on the cover of the coveted New Musical Express, immortalizing their personas and capturing the spirit of the English thriving music scene. I'm Richard Smith and I'm your host. I'm a filmmaker and art director. In episode 4, we meet a powerhouse image maker, someone whose work across multiple creative disciplines has helped to shape the identities of bands like Depeche Mode and U2 and many, many more. Destroy the Influence of Punk is produced by Be Right Back Studios, a full-service video and audio production company specializing in providing strategically driven original content. Founded on the belief that context gives everything meaning, Be Right Back Studios provides over 35 years of industry expertise and is more than just a production partner. Visit BeRightBackStudios.com to learn more. Where do I begin introducing my guest today? Not only is he one of the world's most prolific photographers, he's also a prolific video director. He's directed multiple films and has published multiple books. He's a painter, and one time he played drums on Top of the Pops with Depeche Mode. He's a towering genius, someone who put my career on the map. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Anton Corbijn.
Hey, Richard.
Hey, Anton, thank you for making it on the show. I appreciate you finding the time.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking me.
Tell me about that appearance on Top of the Pops. Did you always want to be in a band?
Well, when I was young, growing up on this very religious island, I felt that the musicians I saw on photographs and magazines seemed to have a much more liberal world than the one I was inhabiting. So when we moved to a bigger city, when I was 17, there was a band playing in the city called Groningen, which is in the north of Holland. It was a band I really liked called Solution. But, I was very shy when I was young, and we just moved to this town, so I hadn't met anybody yet in school or anything. And I asked my father if I could borrow his camera when I went to this concert. And I felt more secure having a camera in my hand, so I could always pretend. So I walked to the stage, and I did take 9 pictures I counted the other day. I sent most of those over to a magazine, and to my surprise, they published them. And I didn't know anything about focusing or whatever. But because they published them, I thought it was the docs bollocks, as it were. Of course, they didn't pay me. That's how it started for me. And then I wanted to be part of the music world. And I realized through photography I could be. And with Top of the Pops, it was just because when Depeche Mode was in the studio, I got a little bored, so I would go and play a bit of drums. But when Alan Wilder left the band and the first single of the new album was released, they asked me to play drums on Top of the Pops. And they even asked me for the tour. And I said, I'm too expensive. I don't know how I got out of that one. But I got money from the BBC, a check of £200 twice.
Wow.
That's the only money I earned as a musician ever.
Did you consider going on a path in religion, or was just your family was very religious?
But most people in my family were minister of religion for some reason. So I felt, being the eldest of the 4 kids, I probably was supposed to go that same direction. And for a long time, I thought I'm going to be a missionary. And then when I was about 12, I read in the paper that in New Guinea, they ate 2 missionaries, and that was the end of that idea. and then there was many years that I had no idea what to do with my life. I was so grateful when the camera came around. I felt and suddenly had a purpose in life. And that's why I gave it everything. I gave photography everything because I had nothing to fall back on.
Some of your early photographs were pictures of the Dutch musician Herman Brood and the wild romance. I read he was a little anti-establishment, a little extreme in his points of view. Something about that felt a little bit like punk before punk for me. You know, as an outsider at that time, did punk make an impact on your work?
Well, in the sense that without any qualifications, I just became a photographer. So that was quite punk. But attitude-wise, I wasn't so punk. I think I was a bit scared. I didn't like shooting concerts as punk because I was quite tall. And when they would spit, it was not so nice to be at the front. But Herman Brood wasn't really punk.
No.
He had a attitude that was very interesting. He was a mix of swagger, sophistication. He was very good looking, always with girls. He was a painter. He studied art.
Right.
And he was also a drug user. And was countless times taken in by the police, but he was very liked in Holland. He was a real charmer.
You moved to London towards the end of the 70s, you know, seeing what was happening in the music industry, etc. It must have been exciting, or I don't know.
Yeah, it was, but I think I was very clueless, to be very honest. I mean, I liked Supertramp and the Sex Pistols, so that gives you an idea of not having really developed a proper taste. But in the end, I liked people who gave everything to music, who were very intense, because I felt a similarity to my own life. I gave everything to photography. I persevered. I had no money, but I had a dream and I had ideas of pictures, but I couldn't describe them yet to myself. It was once or twice a year I took a picture where I felt that's the kind of picture I want to take, not knowing how I got to that sometimes. I'm very intuitive. I'm not a studio photographer.
Yeah, I mean, your photographic style is reminiscent of the heroes of reportage, etc.
Yeah, in a way, I think the documentary photography definitely had an influence on my work.
Right.
That was quite big in Holland in the 70s.
What convinced you to move to London?
I think there were two things. I worked for a music magazine in Holland called Oor magazine, which funnily enough still exists. And that was really very popular and cool and all these things. And I became the chief photographer so late 70s. And I went a few times to England for them to shoot for their stories. And I always felt that coming to England, my pictures, I think, were better than when I photographed in Holland. I don't know. That's maybe just a romantic sense of what was really the case. But I loved that always to shoot in England. And then in 79, this album came out from Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures, and I liked that very much. And I felt I should just go there and be where that music comes from. So in October 79, my then girlfriend and me moved to England. I had in the summer of that year, prior to that, I had gone to the New Music Express, showed them a sort of portfolio, and the editor, Neil Spencer, liked it a lot. And he said, I'll leave some here, we're going to publish some. And they did. And I said, well, if I come back and come and live here, would you give me some work? And I said, sure. So I moved there and I went to the NME again. I said, hi Neil, I moved. What? Who's this person?
Right.
I remember so well. He took me into the room where all the writers were, and they all had piles of papers and all kind of things on the desk. Total opposite of Clean Holland, where people, music magazines, it's all very
organized.
Yeah, very organized, which I think it doesn't mean you make better work. But they're all typing, and he said, hello everybody, this is Anton. He's a Dutch photographer. He's very good. Anybody got some work for him? And you heard people stopping typing, and they looked at me, and slowly they started to type again. and one person started to sing, I hate the fucking Dutch. They live in windmills and wear clocks. Which was some song I didn't know by John Doe, apparently. My heart sank.
That was your lucky break.
Then within a few days, I got a call, and they said I could photograph a gig at the Marquee, and that was Bill Haley and the Comets. But I did it, and then they published it. It was small, but they liked it. And then one of the photographers got ill, And the job was to shoot the Joe Jackson. So they called me, and of course I was available. Nothing else to do. So that was my breakthrough, because Joe liked the pictures and the enemy liked the pictures a lot. And then a few weeks later, I did already covers, because it was a weekly. The turnover was incredible. It just went very fast.
One of the first images that you took was the famous image of Joy Division of Ian looking back as the band is going down the stairs. At the time, it captured a lot how people felt about his death, which actually occurred the following year. How did that kind of make you feel? What was the impact on you, that kind of moment? I know the NME used that on the cover to announce his...
Yeah, that's right, in May 1980. Well, it was an autonomous photograph. I instigated it, I think, early November. I just moved to London, and I managed to black myself in to the gig by saying I was an important photographer from Europe. I spoke to them, and I loved the gig. I took some pictures of the gig, as I want to do a group shot. Could they meet me the next morning? And I lived in Bayswater then. And the only tube station I really knew was not Bayswater, but the one before.
Lancaster
Gate. Yeah, exactly. Which had stairs going down and then these lights over it. And so I asked them if to come there. And they reluctantly, I guess, said yes. So they were there at whatever time the next day, which was a Sunday. It was quite quiet. And I asked them to look away from the camera. To me, it was like working with the title of the album, which was Unknown Pleasures. And I thought, they're making a trip to Unknown Pleasure. And the darkness of the music.
At the time, it obviously felt like reportage, photographing a moment, whereas...
No, it was really set up by me. I had this vision. And then I asked Ian to look back, because I thought, otherwise it's really just four heads. And it's nice if there's some moment of connection. And that was it. And
right.
I sent in the contact sheets that I liked the pictures a lot, and they asked me to come to Manchester a few months later to do one more shoot. I had no inclination of Ian's state of mind, though it was just, he was the singer and it was a visual thing. But of course, I felt the mood of the music was in the picture. I thought their bodies kind of indicated what kind of music it was. And then when Ian passed away, the enemy indeed used it on the cover. So that's why people think it was a commissioned shoot, but it wasn't. And prior to that, I had offered it to many magazines, and nobody liked the picture. Couldn't see all the faces. And of course, when Ian passed away, it seemed very apt. That picture got alive on its own when Ian passed away. That I had nothing to do with.
You told me that you sold your house in North London so that you could fund the making of your film Control.
No, I didn't sell. I sold it afterwards, but I mortgaged it to build.
Why was it so important for you to make that film?
I started doing videos in 82, 83. And they were usually not performance-based videos, but more little stories. And a lot of people said to me, you should be making films. These are like little movies. And like I said earlier, I was quite shy and I couldn't envisage myself to be at the head of a team of 150 people. And also, as a photographer, I work quite intuitively. And for a movie, I need to have ideas up front. And I found it really difficult. So I held off. And then my friend Herbert Grönemeyer always said, well, you should do movies, I said, well, no, I can't do that. So eventually the script came around. I felt I had a connection with the story, an emotional connection. So maybe this is the one film I could make. And it did. And then I financed it mostly myself, because the people who said they were producers really fucked up. But it's a long story. I put some money in, and Martin Gore put some money in. I put everything I had in, and we made the film.
It seems similar to your photographic. Starting out in photography, you were very driven by wanting to do something to kind of, further an aspect of your creativity.
I like everything that I do to have some depth. And that's why it becomes quite intense for me to work with things.
So a lot of the photographs, like the Joy Division image, ended up on the covers of the music press. Do you think that's why so many people wanted to work with you? Because, an Anton Corbijn photo would mean you'd end up on the cover?
Absolutely. I don't really like cover photography of magazines because there's so many rules. But for the enemy, it's a lot of freedom. So I really enjoyed that.
During that time, that you probably photographed almost every single significant musician band. Joy Division, Elvis Costello, The Slits, Simple Minds, Fat Gadget, Nick Cave, so many people. In some ways, you know, it almost seemed like if you were photographed by Anton Corbijn, you'd arrive. You really help establish and legitimize a lot of their careers. It's clear that there was something about a photograph by you that really resonated with the bands, but also with the public.
I don't know how other people see me in that sense. And I was quite ambitious, I have to say, when I look back, because I would buy all the music magazines every week and put them on the table, the Sounds and Melody Maker and the NME. And then I would think that the NME cover was the best. And I wanted it to be the best.
Hi there, sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying the show, please leave a review or a comment. For the latest news and updates, make sure to also follow us on Instagram at Destroy Punk Podcast. Thank you, and now back to the show. That opportunity to capture the cultural history in the making obviously really established you, like I said, as one of the masters of photography. What do you think your legacy will be?
A lot of people that get something out of it, of course. I'm proud of it because I have no education. I'm proud of it because it's what I wanted to do, and I succeeded. But it was also a time where you could succeed.
Right.
And I do design. I photograph so many different kind of people. And I did little films, I do real films, I do stage design. So there's always somewhere something I can do. How
much record cover work did you do in the very beginning? Did it take a while?
I did some in Holland. So I did The Greatest Hits by Steely Dan, Herman Brood records, Van der Graaf Generator. I did stuff and pieces, not always the cover. In Holland I did covers for Herman Brood and Golden Earring and Sporto, Grupo Sportivo and Sweet the Buster, whatever. It doesn't ring a bell, but my most well-known picture was Steely Dan. That was shot in 1976. Then it was published in Holland, then it was published in Rolling Stone magazine because they saw it and they wanted to publish it. Then they wanted to use it on the gatefold of the Greatest Hits. And I remember I went in 1978, I went to New York, and the then girlfriend of Walter Becker wanted to be my agent. And she had got a lot of my prints. I didn't realize she was hooked on drugs, so these pictures just disappeared. And I got $500 for the use of the picture of Steely Dan. And she said, is that okay with you? I said, yeah, fantastic. Obviously, I could have gotten 20 times that at least. But I was a little boy from Holland. I had no idea the money you can make. I didn't know. And I'm still happy it got used and it's known.
What was the first cover you did, like the Depeche Mode covers, where you did pretty much everything?
I think Fat Gadget, I did some stuff.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I did like Under the Flag, where I painted it and then projected it and used shadow and projection.
Yeah, that's the one where he's carrying the flag?
Yeah. But it's shadow and projection at the same time.
Okay, so he's not actually carrying a flag?
No. The flag was projected and he stood in the light as a shadow, so it looked like that. Yeah. So you already used paint there.
He was a very groundbreaking force in the music industry at that time.
Absolutely. And that's the first time I saw Depeche Mode, the support actor for Fat Gadget.
So you were there with Daniel Miller, I take it, because he was at that concert too?
Yeah, I'm sure, but I was just there for the NME to picture of Fat Gadget live.
It's almost like the equivalent of the Sex Pistols playing in Manchester. You had Daniel Miller, you had Anton Corbijn, you had Depeche Mode all in the room at the same time. Yeah, and they all went off and became famous.
Something. I lived in Somerstown there, which is next to Euston Station. And I had this little corner shop. And I built a darkroom in that corner shop. It was tiny. And I remember I got a call at some point. Hi, this is Frank Tovey. And we're like, oh, yes, hello. Have you heard of me? I said, no. I said, you might have heard of Fat Gadget. He said, I said, no. So that was before that concert. Anyway, he wanted to work with me and he said, I'll do a concert. You want to come and have a look? And then we started work. I did quite a lot of albums with Frank. He was a lovely guy and quite artistic. But that's how it went these days. People would call you, chase you.
I'd read that you got a break shooting music videos through Paul Morley and The Art of Noise and Propaganda.
I filmed with an old video camera from Trevor Horn. and I just shot on the streets of London.
It's nothing like anything I've ever seen by you.
Oh, you have seen it?
Yeah, it's on the internet. But was it daunting to go from still photography to video?
If you see my first videos, the camera doesn't really move. People move in front of the camera. And it wasn't until 86 when I did a video for Depeche Mode in America, where there was no money, and I had to be my own cameraman. That's when I started to move the camera more, and that's why I understood more about movement.
You seem to find your voice very quickly.
Yeah, I guess. I just got so annoyed with the videos I saw at the time because they were not very artful. I felt that the photography, I tried so much that the photos fit the music of the people I was photographing, and I couldn't see why they didn't have the same standards for music videos.
It definitely was a pioneering time in terms of music videos. I was reading about Peter Kerr, who shot some work with Cabaret Voltaire.
He was great.
It was such a novel thing back in 1980 or whenever it was. You mentioned Depeche a minute ago, and I read that you didn't hold them in very high regard, but you did that first video in 86 for a question of time because, again, you wanted to do something. You sort of invested in your work.
I did a still shoot with them in 81 for the Enemy.
Right.
And they really liked it, and Mute Records asked me to do the press pictures, but I found them too lightweight. So I turned that down twice. And it wasn't until that video where I didn't care who it was for, because it was a video that had to be done in America. I'd never done a video in America, and I liked this whole idea of American landscape and roads, road movies. So that's why I said yes to it. And I was surprised they liked the video.
Well, I read that they were going through a change as well. Obviously, Vince Clarke had left early in the 80s, and then the band was still trying to find a new voice for themselves. I read that they were looking to change direction a little bit, or to grow, I suppose. Did you take them more seriously in 86?
Yeah, it's still a bit poppy, my video, but I was impressed seeing them live, because they shoot it mostly live. But it was the end of their tour. They never got back to me what they thought of the video. And I thought, oh, they must have hated it. 9 months later, I got a call. Yeah, we're recording in France for a new album. We'd love you to come and listen to a song with a view of maybe doing a video. That's when I realized they had liked what I did. And that's when we started a long relationship. But I was never asked to be in there for the long haul. It was just one thing after the other.
It's been a long time. It's rare that there's that long-term relationship, but you've grown with the band, or the band's grown with you, or I don't know how
It's very different in hindsight than when you're there, taking decision by decision, one at a time.
Right. You have described them as a cult. Are you involved in more than the visuals?
Well, I don't write the music. No, I'm involved in the visuals and the friends, and I like to think with them or for them. Same with you too. It's bands you work with a lot. You want to be part of the process in some way. You think for them. You don't try to do the same picture you would do for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
For me, there's definitely U2 pictures and Depeche Mode pictures. Because I still think in terms of stills as the first thing. And then comes the moving bit.
I mean, just coming back to that one question that you described them as being a cult. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, you're in a taxi and they talk to you, and I said, well, I work with Depeche Mode. Depeche Mode, they're still going. Whereas if you talk about U2, you don't get that answer. Whereas Depeche play the same places as U2.
Right.
They have this incredible following. So that's why I think it's like a cult. There's people who buy every record, go to all the concerts. They sometimes take holidays so they can go to 10 gigs in Europe or America. Pretty amazing. And then the kids grow up listening to Depeche Mode. So there is this huge audience.
Right. The movie you made, Spirits
In the Forest.
Yes.
Yeah, that shows you what a cult band it is, because it was people from lots of different places in the world saying what Depeche Mode meant to them. And then at the end, everybody's coming to the same gig, which is the gig I was filming live. That was in a way an idea from the band. I don't know, of the record company. But I liked the idea. And all the footage of the fans in Mongolia or California were not filmed by me, but I took all the material. I made it to a film.
Okay. It was very unique. I've never seen a concert movie like that before.
Yeah. It was very moving, but Depeche Mode saved people's lives.
The stories were very compelling. You talked about style a minute ago, and you said you don't have a lot of styles. I think something that is so powerful about your work is how it demystifies the subject. They often feel very accessible but heroic. And I'm interested how you create such bonds with your subjects. There are so many people you photograph that you maybe have met for 1 minute.
I mean, you mentioned it earlier, reportage photography. That's what I saw in Holland happening in newspapers in the 70s. And I think it's an integral part of my approach. And that makes things feel quite realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that element. And I think that I don't come across too threatening to people. So when I photograph them, they relax a little.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't do big setups. I see other photographers in America especially, they work with a lot of lights, assistants, and it's a very different thing. It's an idea of a rock star or something. And I think in my photographs, there really are these people.
So much of your early work, for me, had a real seriousness. There was a real brutal beauty to it. In your recent book, I think the Depeche Mode book, you talked about imperfection is perfection. You know, what I start to see, and you touched on this a little bit, was the more recent work is starting to get more playful, not as serious. It seems more of a reflection of your personality. I'm curious why the shift.
I think that I've become a bit lighter in life. It's such an incredibly serious world at the moment. And without resorting to photographs that are meaningless, I still want to have a little bit of spark in them. But that's how my own mental state is. And I enjoy life very much, like all the chances I've been given and stuff. So maybe that comes across in the pictures in the end. But it's a somber world, you know. But I don't want to do political stuff.
What about for political causes or for things like Extinction Rebellion, let's just say, people who are wishing to change things in the world?
Yeah, but leave the soup of Van Gogh, please.
Sorry, that was a very close to home subject.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't see the point of that, to be honest. I think they should protest proper, but don't destroy art.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the great things we have. But I can see people, when they don't get a result, they become frustrated and then resort to that kind of stuff. I'm ambivalent about some of these goals.
Mm-hmm.
But I have no solution for it at the same time. So. No, I'm not pretending to have solutions.
You're a big fan of Captain Beefheart, Don Van Vliet.
Don van Vliet. Yeah.
Don Van Vliet, sorry.
Yeah, his grandparents came from Holland, I think.
Right. A lot of the work that you've done and continue to do today, like with David Gilmour, you're using art in your actual covers, even set design, and obviously a lot of the work we did together. The question I'm getting at is, do you see yourself as an artist, or do you want to be an artist?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I find it important to think that I'm an artist. I think some things are artful, some are less so. I use paint, if that's what you mean with art.
Yeah.
I like the brushstroke. It's like that, and I don't know much about typography, so I started to make my own typography. That's where that comes from. And that was in itself successful and suited Depeche Mode really well. I've just did a cover for U2, how to reassemble an atomic bomb that's coming out 20 years after the original thing. So there's an alternative cover which I did, which I actually wanted to do at the time, but it was not approved. But now they love it. So I was 20 years ahead of time.
It seems that you're always inserting yourself into your work in some way or other, whether it be through the painting, whether it be through the video or the photography or just the characterization of those things. It's very much you giving yourself. I wanted to go back to one thing, if we can.
Yes.
How hard it is to be a photographer these days, things like Instagram. And I know you had mentioned to me how difficult it was basically being forced to use Instagram as an outlet. That isn't what you said, but
Yeah, no, that's true, because magazines sort of fall away. And in order to show your work, I use Instagram.
Has it changed your approach to photography, or do you still approach what you do the same? Or
I like people finding my work somewhere, right? That's what I always liked about magazines. It's unlike an exhibition where people go deliberately to see your work. You accidentally meet your work if you publish in magazines. And I always like that. And it's the same as then with Instagram.
But it's a harder channel. Back in the days of The Enemy and Melody Maker and Sounds, English newspapers particularly, that's, like you said, they were weekly, so you were getting your work published constantly if you were good.
True, yeah, that's just a different era.
You've told me some of your early photographs, you often had maybe like 30 seconds, maybe I'm exaggerating, to take a photograph. And it seems to be you always have had to think very quickly, okay, how can I turn this situation into something that's meaningful? I look at so many of your photographs, but they seem so spontaneous.
Yeah, well, it sometimes is. I think I have an idea about a person in my head, and that probably influences the moment. It informs me of that person before I meet them quite often, because they're usually in a public area, the people I photograph, and that helps a lot, getting an idea about the people before you meet them, and that helps with the pictures. If I had to photograph people I didn't know, people who don't have an artistic profession, then I think it would be harder for me.
In the beginning, all of your photographs used the black frame, around the photo. And I remember when we did Famous, your first book together, I was petrified about cropping your photos because you believed that you didn't touch anything inside of that black edge. But why did you move away from that and then starting shooting color?
Oh, well, color was just because I guess I had to change things. Up till 89, I photographed everything on 35 millimeter, and then I started to shake things up a bit for myself. I have to rethink compositions and stuff. I was very severe about my pictures being full frame.
Right.
I remember I would call magazines up if they cropped it, and I would be so angry. I don't think it did me much good, that anger. But I let all that go, and I found pictures much nicer without the black border in the end.
Well, also a lot of people came along that were doing it as well.
Yeah.
Not as well.
Yeah.
As well. The process you called painting with light that you did for Depeche Mode's Policy of Truth, I was curious where that came from, because that was a departure from black and white moving into color.
Which was then copied by U2 for After Baby, which I did in color mostly.
Right.
But Bono said he loves that Depeche Mode stuff. Can we do some of that? But we did some quite experimental work in the early 90s when I did these pictures with a flashlight, which I first did in 1981 or 2 with John Cale, when I had no light and I had to do something, and I did that in full darkness, and then I came back to that late 80s, early 90s. Did something with Morrissey. Then we did the Depeche stuff, and because only recently, like maybe 5 or 10 years, 8 years ago, I became friends with Paolo Rovesi, who's a beautiful photographer, mostly in fashion. But he uses that method a lot, and I was unaware of it. But he's much more a poet than I am. I'm more graphic in how I photograph things. But we were going to do some shows together, actually with him, me, and Peter Lindbergh, the three of us. When then Peter passed away, I have to see if I can do a show with Paolo at some point, just with pictures with torchlight. I'm doing one small one in Germany. It opens the 1st of November in Frankfurt. And it's called Licht. Licht, yeah.
Which is German for light?
Yeah. Or Dutch. It's also Dutch for light.
So it sounded like you needed to do that. Maybe you needed to do that in the first instance, but where was that technique coming from?
It was just something I thought of. Although, of course, I guess it's established in some way. But when I first used it, it was my own idea. Mm-hmm. And then I started to do fashion things, and I didn't understand fashion at all. And I thought, if I make it more graphic, that's an approach. I didn't know what to do with beautiful girls and clothes. I have to admit. I shot on slide film. What's it called again?
Ectochrome?
Yeah, but you have picture as a positive. And I cared so little about it. I sent the originals to magazines and never got those back. So there's so much stuff missing of my color work because I just didn't care about color. I never liked it. I didn't think I was good in making a color picture. I always felt black and white was what I wanted to express.
You've directed a lot of films and you shot a lot of videos. When Control came out, I was surprised that you didn't shoot that yourself.
It's really hard to shoot that yourself, and especially your first film, because you have to look so much at how the actors are acting, if they convey what needed to be done, and to also look at the aspects of a camera, that you do everything right. Also physically, it'd probably be too hard for me.
I remember the first time I saw it, there was a stillness to it, which I was unsure about cinematically, but then seeing it again, there was an atmosphere to it. There was a stillness to it, which was really quite poignant and really drew you in. Was that deliberate?
Yeah, the stillness, because it's how I remembered everything. It also was my first film. I was insecure, and I didn't want it to look like other films. But it was tough. I remember we sending up for the Berlin Film Festival, and they turned it down. And I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I put money in there, which I didn't get back, even when it was a success. But I became very insecure. And then the first review we had was in The Observer. And some guy who was just jealous of me wrote the review. He got in there through a ticket as a friend of somebody, I don't know. It was a big review and it was so negative. I thought, how? It can't be. It's a good film. I kept thinking it's a good film. This can't be. And then, of course, after that, it won so many awards, so it turned itself around. It was a tough start. Of course, you don't make films for awards, but it gives you some more confidence for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough because it was Joy Division. It was your first film. It was a story that maybe not everybody knew, but it was very familiar, particularly in music circles. So I can imagine it like any film, maybe it's put a lot of pressure on retelling that.
But yeah, because there's a lot of people who love, just like me, love Joy Division.
Right.
And if you hit the wrong notes, they're watching everything in detail. And I remember Peter Doig didn't want to see the film, and I went over to see him in Tobago at Trinidad, and that was in 2012, I think, or 11 or 12. So it was years after the movie had come out, he'd refused to see it because he didn't want to be disappointed and didn't want his memory to be taken away from him. Unfortunately, he loved it, or thought that was good. But yes, it's tough when you make a movie about a real person. People have their own interpretation of how they see these people.
Do you see any role for AI or anything like that in what you're doing?
I don't like anything I see with AI, but I know the possibilities are endless. I don't like it for my own work at the moment. I've seen people trying to be me through AI or whatever, asking AI to make something. And there doesn't seem to be a human soul in there. There doesn't seem to be doubt in there. And I've always seen people trying to copy my pictures, but the misses is me. My insecurities are not in there. It's really interesting to have imperfection.
Rather than fine-tuning something and polishing it.
Human failure is important, I think, in art.
In the very beginning, when I talked about punk, you said to a certain extent you had a semi-punk, do-it-yourself attitude.
That's what I got from punk, really.
But you've really thrown yourself into so many different things. You're a self-taught photographer, set design, graphic design, filmmaking, all of these things. You've done a little bit of drum playing. You've just thrown yourself headlong into it. What haven't you done and what's next?
Well, I wouldn't mind looking at painting at some point, because I use paint, but I can't say I'm really painting. But I'm going to make another film. I have 3 exhibitions coming up, so it's busy on that scale. I have a movie coming up with Helen Mirren. She's playing Patricia Highsmith.
Oh, the
writer, and trying to get this movie off the ground for 2 years, but because of the success of the Ripley series that she wrote, there's a lot of interest now.
Called Switzerland?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, one thing you maybe think of was the Squaring the Circle film.
Oh, yeah.
It was wonderful to see a film about album cover imagery. Obviously, that's something that's very close to your heart.
But yours too, I guess, because you did quite a few too.
Yeah. But to you, what's important about record covers, but what do you think they mean to the people who buy them, buy the records, etc.?
Right, I thought the bit that Noel Gallagher was talking about record sleeves, where before you play it, you read everything on the sleeve, so you get into a frame of mind to be receptive to that music. That was the same for me. And in Holland, not knowing much, having a fantasy world about the music world, I loved record sleeves. I just read everything on it. And I guess you have a fantasy about how that's get made, and it made a world for me that I wanted to be part of. And indeed, these record sleeves were very well known when I grew up, the ones in the film. Some better than others, but some I put in because the story was just great. Like Paul McCartney with the wings on the top of a mountain. You can't conceive that nowadays, that you would actually do that.
Right. The process for making the imagery that Hypnosis made, today you would probably create it on Photoshop or something, but back in those days, everything had to be done manually in some way or another.
Yeah, either through the camera or with scissors and yeah.
Right, literally manually piecing things together, yeah.
Which I love. I love that too.
All right, Anton.
Good.
I know it's getting late for you. I appreciate
Great.
you setting aside some time.
That's great, Richard. It was really nice to talk to you.
When is the film due to be released?
We'll be shooting January, February, a bit of March. So we're aiming for, I guess, Venice Film Festival.
So next year?
Yeah, for next year.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks. Have a nice evening there.
Thanks, Anton.
Ciao, Richard.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.
My name is Richard Smith, and I'm your host. I'm a filmmaker and art director, and once upon a time I was part of the big 80s. I designed record covers for Depeche Mode, I danced with Bono, discussed art with Mick Jagger, and drank tea with Susie Sue. I also grew up during those turbulent times in England in the late 70s and was driven by the do-it-yourself ethos of punk. I obsessed over bands like Joy Division and New Order and went on to work for the album cover designer Peter Saville. I believe that year, that moment in 1976, when a bunch of foul-mouthed yobs cursed and swore on national television, changed the future of culture forever, and is what brought us to where we are today. So where do we go from here? Will emerging new technologies be the catalyst that tears down the walls of mediocrity, throwing culture and society into chaos and revolution again? We'll have to wait and see. This has been another episode of Destroy. Thank you for listening. Destroy is a Be Right Back Studios production. Learn more at BeRightBackStudios.com. And please tune in again for another episode of Destroy, the Influence of Punk podcast, wherever you listen or download.